Off the coast of the Caribbean, there is a piece of America that feels like a tropical paradise. Green mountains rise from the water, rolling down into white sandy bays tucked at the foot of the hills. Offshore, boats drift quietly in the wind, and giant cruise ships take turns entering one of the most beautiful harbors in the Caribbean. This is St. Thomas. For millions of tourists, this island is a place to get away from the world for a few days, finding blue water, white sand, and a slow pace of life under the tropical sun. But for the people here, St. Thomas is not a vacation. It is where they were born, where they raise their kids, and where they live in a community so tight-knit that neighbors almost become part of the family. That is the life of over 42,000 people in America's Caribbean paradise, where paradise is not just made of blue water, but also shaped by people who always look out for each other. Mornings in St. Thomas start on the hills. When the first sunlight spills over the mountainside and touches down on Charlotte Amalie, the port city slowly wakes up in a familiar rhythm. At that time, boats out in the bay also start prepping for their trips. Over on Main Street, shops open their doors one by one to welcome the first customers of the day. Bakeries start firing up. The smell of fresh-baked bread mixes with coffee and drifts through the still empty streets. Down at the bottom of the hill, safari taxis head out for their first run of the day. At the same time, the harbor starts to come alive. Ferries get ready to leave St. Thomas for the neighboring islands, while fishing boats come back after hours offshore, bringing in the first catch of the morning. Porters, sailors, and passengers pass by each other in the sunlight that just hit the water. But as soon as you leave the main downtown area and head up the steep roads winding around the hillside, the pace of life becomes much more intimate. Up in the neighborhoods looking down at Charlotte Amalie, mornings usually start out on the balcony with a cup of tea, resting on the railing. Down at the local market, friendly greetings echo across the street stalls. People take their time walking past the produce stands, picking out fresh food for their meals and stopping to chat with the vendors. Around here, a trip to the market is not just about buying necessities, but also a chance for familiar faces to catch up amidst the island's slow pace of life. Those quick chats at the market are just the start of a life built on closeness. Back in the houses lining the hillsides, folks go about their days surrounded by family and neighbors. Grandparents, parents, and kids usually live close enough to help watch the little ones, share meals, and show up when someone is having a hard time. Come the weekend, that tight bond follows them down to the beach. Mats are rolled out on the white sand. The smell of barbecue mixes with the ocean breeze. Dominoes get slammed on the table amid laughter and arguments that never really get too serious. Kids run along the beach while the adults keep an eye on them. Old stories get told all over again. Family memories keep getting passed down from one generation to the next. St. Thomas is part of the United States. US dollars are used in every store. News from Washington, Miami, or New York still shows up every day. flights and boats constantly connect the island to the rest of the country. But behind that modern shell is an identity shaped over centuries. It is where a Danish colonial past meets West African heritage, where Caribbean culture blends with modern-day American influences. It all exists together, on a small island in the middle of the blue sea. You can clearly see those traces on the streets of Charlotte Amalie. Red roofs sit among the green hills. Thick-walled stone warehouses and narrow streets are still standing near the harbour. Some street names still have a Danish ring to them, like memories that have not faded from the city. But behind those European-looking walls is a life that is entirely Caribbean. Soca music echoes from a small stage up high, drifting down into the city with the ocean breeze. The smell of grilled fish and spicy seasoning drifts through the alleys. In St. Thomas, history does not sit in a museum. It lives in the architecture, the music, the language, and the kitchen. The deepest roots are in its West African heritage. The people who were brought here to work the plantations held on to their rhythm, their memories, and their spirit. Over generations, those things have become the soul of St. Thomas. But the Caribbean soul does not just live in the city, it is also shaped by the sun, the wind, and the water surrounding the island. From above, St. Thomas looks like a solid green mountain floating in the ocean. The volcanic terrain pushes the island up into steep hills before dropping down into little bays. Houses cling to the mountainside, stacked in layers up high. Winding roads hug the landscape, taking you around tight corners before suddenly opening up to wide views of Charlotte Amalie, where the harbour sits deep between the hills. The coastline of St. Thomas does not stretch out in a straight line. Points of land and mountainsides carve it up into curving bays, where white sand tucks right against the bottom of the hills. Trade winds blow through the trees, cooling things down and carrying the smell of sea salt deep into the neighborhoods. Out east, Sapphire Beach opens up to a huge stretch of blue water. Sailboats sit out in the bay, and little islands look faded on the horizon. Under the sun, the ocean splits into different layers of color, from clear blue near the shore to deep blue out in the open water. Lindquist Beach is quieter. The white sand sits between green trees and calm water. Waves wash up on the shore and slowly pull back, leaving behind a thin layer of water that reflects the sky. As the late afternoon rolls in, the light softens and covers the whole bay in a warm golden color. But the beauty of St. Thomas does not stop at the shoreline. Through the turquoise water, coral reefs show up as dark, winding patches along the ocean floor. In the shallows, sunlight shoots through the water and hits the sandy bottom. Schools of colorful fish dart around the rocks, tucking into small cracks one second and popping out into the shifting light the next. This is not just pretty scenery for tourists. It is a living, fragile ecosystem tied to the island's food supply. In St. Thomas, The Caribbean flavor shows up best in its rich and comforting food. Mahi-mahi, snapper, and tuna are usually grilled or pan-seared, keeping the meat firm and the ocean flavor front and center. Conch gets minced up to make crispy, golden conch fritters or tossed with citrus for a refreshing salad. Then there are the classic Caribbean dishes. Fungi is made from cornmeal, soft and thick, usually eaten with fish or anything with a lot of sauce. Callaloo is a green soup cooked with okra, meat, or seafood. Johnny cakes are golden fried bread, crispy on the outside but soft on the inside, and you can eat them with a savory meal or just as a snack. St. Thomas food is a mix of Caribbean, West African, and European flavors. Those dishes are kept alive through recipes passed down from one generation to the next. Young folks learn by standing next to the adults, watching how to clean fish, stir the fungi, season the callaloo, and then memorizing the flavors by feel. A kitchen is a place where memories get handed down. When a meal is put on the table, the island's history is not some distant thing anymore. It becomes something you can see, smell, and taste. During festival days, Charlotte Amalie completely changes. The sound of steel pans echoes through the blocks. Soca beats pull the crowds toward downtown, while calypso music tells stories about the community's life and history. Feathers, beads, and brightly colored costumes move in the sunlight, making the old streets feel wide awake. Carnival is not just a parade. For the people of St. Thomas, it is a statement of freedom, survival, and Virgin Islands pride. Adults get the costumes ready. Young folks join the performing troops. Kids learn how to play the steel pan, how to keep the beat, and why this festival matters so much. Over here, culture is not kept behind museum glass. It lives in the hands, the footsteps, and the memories of the people who keep pushing it forward. Every drumbeat, every dance move, and every costume is a way for one generation to pass their identity down to the next. Vic's Pride is therefore not just a slogan. It is the feeling of belonging to a place that is tied to the US, but has a history and rhythm all its own. During Carnival, Danish traces stand still on the old streets. West African heritage rings out in the drums, and the Caribbean Sea reflects the bright colors. That is when St. Thomas does not just show the world its beauty, but also shows the world its soul. Tourism is the biggest driver of the economy in St. Thomas. For a lot of locals, the cruise ship schedule is basically their work schedule. Some drive taxis to take tourists up to the scenic overlooks or down to the famous beaches. Others work in resorts, duty-free shops, or restaurants overlooking the bay. Every ship that pops up on the horizon brings in a fresh wave of work, making Charlotte Amalie totally packed in just a few hours. From December to April, the high season throws a much more rushed pace over the city. More cars head out. More tables get filled. The long, busy days bring more chances to make money. But when the slow season hits, especially during the months that overlap with hurricane season, the economy noticeably slows down. Fewer ships mean fewer tourists, fewer taxi rides, and fewer work hours. An economy that lives off the island's beauty will always depend on the seasons, the weather, and the ships coming in from the outside. But past the harbour and the tourist shops, St. Thomas has another economy that is smaller and closer to local life. Over in Frenchtown, pirogue boats come back after hours out at sea, bringing in fish and lobster for the markets and restaurants. In the neighborhoods, bakeries, corner stores, and auto shops keep taking care of everyday needs. Schools, hospitals, and government offices provide more stable jobs, keeping the island running even on days when the port is empty. Making money in St. Thomas is only half the story, though. The other half is making sure that money is enough to live on. Almost everything on the island has to make a long trip before it reaches the locals. Produce, milk, cars, building materials, and household goods are all shipped in from the outside. You can see that distance reflected in every price tag on the shelves. What seems like a normal grocery run can turn into a math problem between what you need to buy, what you can swap out, and what has to be left for next time. Folks adapt by making small choices. They compare prices, hit up the local market, and change their meals based on what is available. Some families grow peppers, herbs, or bananas around the house to cut down on relying on imported stuff. Being frugal around here is not some romanticized lifestyle. It is a reflex that comes from living on an island where every single item has to cross the ocean. Housing creates an even bigger pressure. St. Thomas has a lot of steep hills, while flat land for building is really limited. Houses cling to the mountainsides, squeezed between narrow, winding roads. From a distance, they make for a spectacular scene, looking out over the ocean. But hiding behind that beauty is high rent, low inventory, and long housing hunts for families trying to find a decent place to live. Electricity is also a huge part of the cost of living. The island relies on imported fuel for power, making its electricity rates some of the highest in the US. In a hot, humid climate, running the AC can therefore become an expensive luxury. A lot of houses leave their windows open, build deep porches, and are laid out to catch the trade winds. The ocean breeze does not just feel good. It is also a way for many families to lower a bill that is already way too heavy. That is the paradox of St. Thomas. You might have an ocean view right outside your window, but inside every house, there is a lot of very real math going on. Paradise does not save people from paying rent, grocery prices, or power bills. It just puts those pressures in the middle of a setting so beautiful that outsiders rarely see the rest of the picture. From the neighborhoods up high, down to Charlotte Amalie, the distance might look really short, but on St. Thomas, a straight line pretty much does not exist. Roads hug the mountainside, constantly shifting directions through narrow, steep curves. A place just a few miles away on the map might take a slow and careful drive. Two cars trying to squeeze past each other on a tiny road is enough to bring the whole line of traffic behind them to a stop. For newcomers, that terrain can be confusing. For locals, it is just a normal part of the morning commute or the drive home in the evening. St. Thomas also has a very unique traffic quirk. People drive on the left side of the road, but most of the cars are built to US standards, meaning the steering wheel is also on the left. That unusual combo requires drivers to always pay attention, especially on those winding roads right against the mountainside. But after years of doing it, what once seemed like a hassle just becomes second nature. Having a car is pretty much a must, since housing, schools, and jobs are spread all over. For those who do not drive, safari taxis are a familiar part of everyday life. These open-air trucks cruise along the main routes, carrying passengers, the sound of their engines, and quick chats between people who know each other. But the roads only connect places on the same island. To get to St. John or Water Island, folks hop on a ferry. Those trips can look as beautiful as a vacation cruise, with blue water and little islands spread out on both sides. But for a lot of locals, it is just how they get to work, visit family, or handle their daily errands. Further out is the Cyril E. King Airport. From there, flights connect St. Thomas to Miami, Atlanta, and New York. That is the path that brings goods and tourists to the island. But it is also a vital link for families with relatives on the mainland, for patients needing specialized medical care, and for young people getting ready to start a new chapter in life. On a small island, traveling is not just about getting from point A to point B. It is how St. Thomas keeps family, work, education, and healthcare from being cut off from the rest of the world. For a lot of young folks in St. Thomas, growing up usually starts with a flight away from home. The island has public schools, private schools, and the University of the Virgin Islands, which gives them the option to study right in their own community. But not every major or career path is available on an island of just over 42,000 people. When they want to chase more specialized fields, a lot of students have to head over to the US mainland. Leaving St. Thomas opens up a much bigger world. Major cities offer more schools, more jobs, and more options. But they also bring anonymity. For the first time, a young person might walk down an entire street without anyone knowing their name, knowing their family, or stopping to say hello. It is that exact distance that makes the things that used to feel so normal on the island stand out. Like a meal with family sitting around the table, like seeing a familiar face on the taxi ride, like the ocean popping up at the end of every street, like the feeling of belonging to a place where almost every childhood memory is tied to those hills and that blue water. Many want to come back after graduation. They bring back new skills, new ideas, and new perspectives. But wanting to come back can only become a reality if the island has enough of the right jobs. If the opportunities are too slim, they are forced to stay on the mainland, while their families just keep living for those brief reunions between flights. That is the quiet challenge for St. Thomas. How to hold on to the younger generation without making them give up their futures. Because every person who leaves is not just a skilled worker walking away from the island. It is also an empty space left behind in a family, in a community, and in the very future of St. Thomas. Life in St. Thomas is always surrounded by beauty, but that beauty is also very fragile. The island's power grid goes down easily. One blackout can mean the fans stop spinning in the heavy heat, food in the fridge starts to spoil, and a small shop has to close its doors for a bit. What drains people even more is that they still have to pay sky-high prices for a system that is not always reliable. Then comes hurricane season. From June to November, locals watch the water and the sky with a caution that has become a habit. They board up their houses, stock up on food and water, and get ready for the chance of long power outages. A calm ocean can turn real quick, dragging in heavy winds, pouring rain, and days where the whole island is practically cut off from everyday life. Storms can damage homes, block roads, shut down traffic, and put the tourism industry on hold. But once the sky clears up, a different pace of life kicks in. Folks step out of their houses, drag fallen trees out of the road, put fences back up, and help patch up damaged roofs. Bouncing back is rarely just a one-family job. St. Thomas also has to deal with a limit that is harder to see. The island needs tourists to create jobs, but massive crowds put a heavy strain on the roads, the beaches, the coral reefs, and the living spaces. The question is not whether St. Thomas should welcome tourists. The question is how much pressure the island can take before its peace and beauty actually start wearing away. Around here, growth always has to go hand in hand with preservation. Because a paradise can only stay alive when the things that make it so special stay intact for both the tourists and the people who actually call this place home. So why do over 42,000 people still choose to stay in a place that is expensive, isolated, and constantly tested by storms? The answer is not in the resorts or on the decks of the cruise ships. It is found in the smaller things. They stay because family lives close enough to be there when they need them. Because neighbors know the kids' names and can tell when a household is going through a rough patch. Because out here, a person rarely has to face everything totally alone. They stay for the slower pace of life, for those calm afternoons by the water, the drawn-out meals, and the porch talks that are not cut short by people being in a rush. In a world that keeps getting louder, St. Thomas still holds on to the pockets of peace that a lot of other places have lost. And they stay for the ocean, not just for its blue water, but because the sea holds their childhood memories, their jobs, those ferry rides, family meals, and days spent together. For the locals, the scenery is not just the background of their lives. It is a part of who they are. Leaving St. Thomas, then, is not just about changing addresses. It can mean walking away from the network of people that shaped your whole life. It means leaving those familiar hillsides, the faces that still say hello on the street, and the water that has been in pretty much every memory. As the afternoon winds down, the cruise ships blow their horns and head out of Charlotte Amalie. The city slows down, families go home, neighbors sit out on the porch. Lights start coming on in layers across the hillsides, while the ocean below slowly turns dark. To the world, St. Thomas is a destination. To the people here, it is where they belong. St. Thomas is part of the US, but lives on Caribbean time. The island welcomes giant ships, but is kept running by a small community. The ocean brings beauty, food, and work, but it also drags storms to their doorstep. Life out here is made up of that morning safari taxi ride, the fishing boat pulling back into Frenchtown, a young person stepping onto a plane, and neighbors pitching in to put a roof back on after a hurricane. It is a fragile paradise out in the ocean, but for over 42,000 residents, it is a hometown first and foremost, held together by family, memories, and a true sense of belonging.